All right. So thank you everyone for joining. This is the second part of our serverless journey. And we have our honorable guest speaker again for part two. Um, Tobenna, thank you for joining again. Really appreciate your time. So while we stay tuned and enjoy the webinar, please, if you have any question, we can wait to the end of the event. Hopefully, we can all learn from this. We're trying to cover as much, but if there's not enough time, maybe we move to part three. But I'm going to give the floor to our honorable guest, Tobenna, to start. Thank you.
All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking some time out today to join the webinar. I want to apologize to everyone. It was supposed to start at 4, but I got caught up in something, so we had to move it to 4:30. So I hope you guys can forgive me, and then I hope I'll make it up to you guys today with this session. So today's session is going to be strictly hands-on because the first time we had the theory part where we introduced all of us to serverless. We talked about the benefits and, why serverless is useful, especially in this, modern dispensation, as they say. So today is going to be more of building of what we have already covered before. So we're going to go further, go a step further, and now interact with not just Lambda, but other AWS services, just so that we can get an understanding of serverless. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to be sharing the architecture diagram of what we're going to be working on, and then we're going to move through it. I don't know if we'll be able to cover all of it. I don't think so. But I'll try to cover up until a reasonable part so that if we don't cover everything here today, then I will send in the rest of it maybe in a repo, and then we can look at it later. Now today, I'm going to be going through the code as well and showing you what's being done. But just because of the time frame that we have, I'm not going to write all of the code from scratch. I'm going to we'll start the project from scratch. I'll get the code, paste it, and then tell you, what we're doing so that we're able to follow through. Is that okay? So you can use the chat as usual, so that we know that there are people in the house today. So, all right, I've gotten a yes from Bayan. Okay, so let's start right away. I'm going to share my screen now, and then I will show you the architecture that we'll be working with today. One moment. Okay, before we do that, right, I wanted to, just refresh our memories or see if we still remember what we did the last time or what we talked about the last time, so that we can use that as like a segue into, and then segue into what we're going to be doing today. So if any one of us can, whatever you remember we spoke about last time, please use the chat, then let's go through it. And then we will start. So anything you remember from the last session, anything? Be like, say, when I remember many things, like people are typing. This one is taking time to update. It's like, you guys remember a lot. But I'm waiting. Oh, first timer, nice. So for Bayern, you can always there's a recording of it which we can share with you of the first time. But we had an amazing time the first time. I'm sure everybody that was here the first time would agree that I had an amazing time and I was the one teaching. Usually the teacher is tired, but I had an amazing time the first time. So, Okay, cloud as a method of computing. Yes, we talked about the different processes we've gone through up until we've gotten to serverless, implementing Lambda API gateway with Node.js application deployment. Very true. We did that the last time. So yeah, I think that kind of captures what we did. We looked at how we've gotten to serverless, what serverless is, why it's important, and then we now built something small. We built a small application with a few endpoints. So today, we're going to be expanding on that, just like I mentioned earlier. And let me know when you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? Yes, no? Okay. So this is what we're going to be doing today. Now, I don't want anybody to get overwhelmed by this diagram that you're seeing. It's actually not as complicated as you think it is. So what we're going to be building today, or what we're going to at least start building today, is a system that enables people to track their spending. So like a budgeting system. Now, if you look at the screen, this is an architecture diagram. I'm sure some of us have seen architecture diagrams before, or if you haven't, I'll just go through it. So the first step in this diagram is your computer, your phone, your laptop, whatever can, make a request, calls the API. So we talked about API gateway the last time, so it's not something that some of us will be new to. We talked about API gateway, and yes, I agree, Lambda is always gold. And we saw how API gateway enables you to be able to, it's the entry point for any application, serverless application. There are others, but API gateway is the one that is most used just because of its simplicity and, the fact that it handles REST APIs more. So we have API gateway. So when you make a request with your phone or with your laptop, or you visit a website that will be calling these APIs that we're going to build today, it hits the API gateway. And then depending on the API that is called, we would either go through another service, which I will speak about in our hands-on, called Cognito. Cognito is used for authentication, is used for storing user credentials and managing user credentials and access to a system. So we're going to look at Cognito, when we start our hands-on. But then there are some other APIs that don't need Cognito. So there's one that enables you to create a user, and there's one that enables you to log in. So see both of them as sign up and log in. So those ones, they're not behind Cognito. They don't need to be authenticated, because at the point you're creating a user, you don't have what to authenticate with. And then when you log in, that's when you're getting your authentication credentials. So those two things will be calling Cognito. But for the rest of the APIs, they're going to be behind Cognito. So they are going to be authenticated. And what that means is if you don't have a profile on the system, you're not able to call those APIs at the back. That's the create transaction, get transactions in plural, get transaction to get a single transaction, updates the transaction, deletes the transaction, and to get a summary. And a summary is kind of like getting your total credits and debits on your profile so that you can see where you are. And then finally, at the last part of things, we're going to be storing all this information in another serverless offering on AWS called DynamoDB. Now, DynamoDB is a data store. How many of us have used MySQL, Postgres, or Oracle DB here? Has anybody used any of those services? Okay. Yep. Victor, which one did you use? Okay, Bayan says no, no worries. We'll learn it today. Postgres, nice. So Postgres is known as a SQL database. Postgres and MySQL, MySQL, they are both called SQL databases, so structured query language. So they are databases. The structure has to be. I'm very happy you said MongoDB actually, because I'll get to that. But there has to be some structure to the data you're putting in those databases. That's databases that are SQL databases. But MongoDB, on the other hand, is a document-based kind of database. So you're storing things as documents. And those kind of database, they call them NoSQL databases. Now, with something like MongoDB, there isn't necessarily, you decide whether you want structure or not. It doesn't have to be structured. You can have unstructured data inside, and all the data doesn't have to conform to, a predefined structure. You decide that maybe at the time that you're building your application, or at the time the data is being stored, you have the freedom to decide that. Now, DynamoDB is AWS's own kind of close equivalent. It's not exactly the same thing, technically, but you can see them in the same light because they are both NoSQL databases. You don't have to define the structure as a table first before you can put things in them. So we're going to be using DynamoDB today. I know we're dealing with kind of financial information, but just for the purpose of this, we'll use DynamoDB just to, demonstrate a fully serverless application. So recap, the application we're working on today, if we're looking at it in a user kind of flow, a user gets on the application, creates a profile, logs in, then they're able to create transactions, they're able to get a list of all their transactions, they're able to get a single transaction, they're able to update transactions that they've entered, they're able to delete transactions that they've entered, and they are also able to view a summary that shows them where they are at a particular point in time. So are they in credit or debit? Do they have money? Have they made more money than they've spent and all of that? So we're going to be building that out today. This is solely backend. We're not building any front-end stuff today. And like I said, I'll try and cover as much as I can, and then we will call it a day. So it's exactly 5 o'clock. So I'll see what we can do between 5 and 6. All right, so let's start. One moment. Let me just move my screen around. Okay, so who remembers what was the name of the technology we used the last time? Can anybody remember? To be able to create our application. Does anybody remember the name of the technology we used? The name of, let me give you an idea, the name of the framework that we used. Does anybody remember? Let me see, who is okay, yes, we use the serverless framework. So Godwin, thank you very much. Godwin, you've won the first prize for today, actually, because you answered first. So you're going to be getting a voucher from Serverless Guru, which is where I work, so that you can learn serverless. So you get a voucher. It's a course that, walks you through serverless from beginner to like more advanced. So I'm going to be sending you, what you do privately on here, send me a message to your email address, and then I will send that voucher. Or hit me up on LinkedIn as well, whichever one is more convenient for you, then we'll send you that voucher. So we'll go straight into the business of the day. Don't mind my screen, I have too many things going on, but we're going to start a new serverless project. And if you remember, how do we start it? We just say serverless. and it tells us tells us to pick what language. I know Victor wants me to pick Python, but Victor, I'm going to disappoint you again. I'll pick Node.js again. And then we give the project a name. Let's just call it budgeting. Or let's use NUG budgeting. Maybe, who knows, we can build this further, Akim, and then sell it to one startup tomorrow. I'm joking, but if anybody is serious, please don't let my joking stop you. You can clone it and build something crazy tomorrow. Okay, so we'll call it ANUG budgeting app. And we're waiting for the templates to download. We don't want to have access to their dashboard. We don't want to deploy yet. We just want to start. So we'll navigate into that folder. And then we will open it in VS Code. Oh, okay. Bayan is using phone, sorry. I don't know how to expand my screen. Does anybody know how? Yeah.
Okay. What are you in the right? It looks like the folder you selected was wrong. Right.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you. So let me open it again.
It's budget, I guess. Budget.
Oh, okay. It's actually ANUG. It's my mistake.
Yeah, NUG budgeting app. Yeah.
Yeah. So open it up. Okay, Godwin, I've gotten your mail. Right after now, I will reach out to you on LinkedIn and get it to you. Okay, so as usual, those of us that attended the last one, we know what this file structure looks like already. We have our serverless.yaml file. We have our README that is there by default. We have a default function, and we have this git ignore that, enables us to say what doesn't go into GitHub if we push it up. Now we're going to get rid of some stuff. So I'm going to get rid of these two files so that we can start from scratch and start building this out. So now I will reference our diagram at every point in time, just so that we're able to understand or refresh our memories as to what we're building. So if I open the diagram now, we're going to be starting this way. We're going to be going this way. And what that means is we're going to start with the things that are on the left and move towards the right. So that being said, we have to now start defining these things. So first off, we need to have our API gateway and our cognito, because these two, I don't know if you can see my mouse, that's the sign up and the login, they would be calling cognito. So we need to define them. And we're going to be seeing some new things today. First of which is, we're going to be, like I said, I'm going to be, because of the length of time, I'm going to be, getting some code, adding it here and explaining what the code is doing. So the first endpoint we're going to be building is the sign up. And in order to do that, we need to define some things. So I'm just going to, give me a moment. I need to stop sharing for a bit and share again. So let me know if you can see the screen. Can you see the screen? I guess yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to be basically getting code from what has already been done and then explaining it as we go through. So give me a sec. Sorry, one moment. Yes, I was sharing the wrong screen. Sorry. So are you guys seeing the new project now? That is the Anok budgeting app. Is that what you're seeing? I just made it bigger.
Yeah, that's what we're saying, your VS Code.
Okay, okay. Because I think I was sharing the already completed one before. So I will be bringing in some stuff one by one and then explaining what it is. So we'll start from here. Okay, so we'll start from here. So today we're going to be doing some stuff. There's a part of serverless framework called plugins, and we're going to be using these plugins going forward to, have some more functionality on our serverless application. So there are 3 plugins here. Once we get to where we'll be using them, then I will let you guys know what they do. But for now, just know that plugins help you add extra functionality easily to your code. And then we have our provider section, which everybody kind of already knows about. It's telling us that we're using AWS with Node.js 18, and then we're defining some default variables. So we're saying by default, we should be on the development stage, and we should be in the US East 1 region. And then moving forward, I'm going to get even some more code. And the next thing we'll be talking about is the environment variables that we'll be using, as well as the documentation that we're going to be using. So I'll pull that over now. So we're defining some environment variables. If you guys remember from the diagram, we have, what we're doing is we're storing transactions. We're going to call them transactions for now. So we need to have a DynamoDB table for transactions. That is where we'll be storing, whenever we create an entry. So say you go outside and you buy shawarma and you want to add it as part of your, expenses, you would enter, it's there that it would be stored. And then we want to have a separate table that stores the summary. So the summary is going to be where you are at the moment, just like we mentioned. So we're just defining some environment variables that we're going to use later for these things. Then we're going to have an index. I'm going to explain an index more when we get to where we will define the DynamoDB tables. But indexes are, if you have a SQL background, so an SQL background, an index is used so that you can get faster access to information. So what what I would usually say about an index is that an index is like when you're reading a book, right? And you put maybe a ruler or a pen there, so that if you come back, you can open that place again. That's what an index is like. So an index gives you fast access so that you can access something quickly. I also use a dictionary analogy. Dictionaries are indexed by letters. So if you wanted to look for the word Amazon, you know that you'd be looking for A, and then you'd be looking under AM first. And going like that till you get the number. So you don't need to flip through the book all through to be able to get the word Amazon. So that's what an index is. So we're going to have an index for one of our tables. Then when you see user pool or client pool, it is Cognito we're talking about, but we will discuss all those things further when we go through the sections where we'll create them. And then we're just storing the region, the AWS region, so that we can use that within our code. And next, there's a section, a custom section on serverless framework where you can define custom stuff. So stuff that is peculiar to you, stuff that you want to keep, like your own, it's like your own, where you store your own information that you would want to use within the application. And one of the things people use that for is documentation. So here we're going to be using this documentation part of the custom section to store our models. We're going to be using those models later to validate the requests that come into our API. Remember from the last time, what we did is we did that within the code. We wrote, if something is not existing, you should return 400. But when you're building at scale, you don't want to be doing that for all your functions. You want to have, you know, a JSON schema that validates whatever request that is coming in and throws a 400 automatically if the request does not match what you expect. So that is what we're doing here. We're going to be defining models that we will use eventually to, you know, validate our requests. And for now, we have two models. That is for sign up and login. So I'll pull in some more. Sorry, this might be the boring part where I'm just explaining things before we actually build. I'm going to pull in functions now. And we're going to have our first function, which is the sign up function. Where are you? So just like we spoke about the last time, the sign up functions is where we basically point to the Lambda functions that we'll be writing. So in this instance, this is more for our sign up. We're going to be creating a handler function. The path is going to be sign up, it's going to be post. And then if you look here, this is where we would now be referencing the documentation that I spoke about earlier. So this is where we would say, for this function, any request that is coming in, it should match, you know, what is under this JSON that we're going to see in a bit. So moving forward from that, we will define the next section, which is actually one of the most important sections that we will define. It's usually the lengthiest one, but I will try and simplify it. Okay, I wasn't even done with the, one moment, with the, I wasn't done with the function definition. So here, what we're saying is we're attaching IAM role statements here. I don't know, has any of us heard about IAM on AWS? I'm guessing a lot of us have used AWS, right? Yes, no? Okay, somebody says yes. So IAM is some call it IAM. It is basically what gives you access to resources on AWS. Now, that is me oversimplifying it, but that's what it is for those of us that haven't heard about it. So here we're allowing this function to access Cognito, and we're also allowing it to access DynamoDB, which is what we're going to be talking about next. So next up, we will be jumping into the resources section, which, like I mentioned, is usually the largest section when you're building your application, because that's where you would define all of your resources. But I will try and break it down as much as I can. One moment. Okay. This isn't complete. I'll correct it. Okay, so this is the resources section. Now, for the resources, it's where you're defining your resources. I'm going to go through each of them one by one. I've already created annotations or comments to let you know what each of them is. So here, we're defining our API gateway responses. Why? Because we need it in order to be able to display the right responses on from API gateway. So here we're defining the 400 responses, basically. That's what we're defining here. And it is pointing to the API gateway that we've defined. Now, in serverless framework, you don't have to explicitly define an API gateway. Once you do this event with HTTP, you've defined the gateway already. So we're pointing this response, gateway response to our API gateway, just for us to have a cleaner approach to things. Then DB tables from here. Now we're first defining the transactions table. And this format of defining things is basically CloudFormation. So that's another thing you guys should know. CloudFormation is valid in serverless framework. So you can write CloudFormation constructs inside your serverless.yml file. So that is totally valid. So for example, this DynamoDB that we've done here is all CloudFormation. So what we're doing here, we're defining the transaction table. We have some attributes that we're defining, which is the transaction ID and the user ID. Now, remember what I said about NoSQL tables. Here, I'm just defining two things, which is the transaction ID and the user ID. There are other things that would come on this table, but I have the freedom to decide when I'm writing my code. I don't need to define them. And that's what makes NoSQL databases what they are. So you don't have to define things upfront. If this was a MySQL, now I have to define everything, because if I don't and I try to add those things to the table, it won't work. And then this is under properties. That's why I define the things I want to predefine, like the columns I want to, or it's not called columns, it's called attributes. But you can see them as columns, the way we have them in SQL databases. So we have defined two things that we want to keep at a bare minimum. And then we have the key schema. Now this is, or how do I explain this? So for DynamoDB, you have to have keys. Now there are two types of keys on DynamoDB. There's a partition key, which is the main key, right? And then there's a sort key. So in this instance, we're having a key here, which is a sort key. And that's why we have the key type as hash, this key is going to be the transaction ID. And we're telling DynamoDB that we're paying per request. There are different billing modes on DynamoDB. So you can either pay per request. So as you're making requests, they're billing you, or you can set like thresholds as to how many units at a time should be used. So they are called RCU and WCU. You can look further into that, but this is a beginner class or workshop, so I won't go too much into detail here. We're giving the table a name, and what we're doing is we're fetching it. If you remember, we had given environment, basically like environment variables. We had given some environment variables, which for this transaction table is transaction dash budget dash. Whenever you see this kind of, syntax in serverless framework, it is basically you're referencing something as well. So here we're referencing, so we're saying it's going to be transactions budget slash dash budget dash whatever stage we're in, which in this case is dev. So going back to the table, we're giving it a name, and then we're having something we call global secondary indexes. Now, remember what I said about indexes before. DynamoDB has two types of indexes. So there's a global secondary index and there's a local secondary index. Now, for global secondary indexes, they're also called GSIs. They can be created at any time that you want to create them. But for local secondary indexes, you have to create them at the point of creating the table. So you cannot update them later. You have to create them when you are creating the table. Or you can't create them after you've created the table. You have to create them at the point of creating the table. But like I said, these are things that are more like as you advance, you will learn about them. Now, here, what we're doing is we are giving it a global secondary index of the user ID. Now, remember, we had two attributes. We had the transaction ID, which we're taking as the main key of the table. And then we have the user ID, which we're using. We're going to use it later to be able to sort transactions by users. So that's why we have it as a global secondary index here. And then when you see this projection type, when you create an index, it means that you are basically saying, I'm creating this index and I want this index to contain everything on that table. So that's what we're saying here, all. Projection type is all because we want everything on the table to be projected to that index. You can, if you don't want to use all, you can define the things that you want. So let's say the table had transaction ID, user ID, it also had, amount, the type of transaction it is. You can specify them one by one if you're concerned about the size of your table, because indexes increase the size of your table. Now, in the same manner, I won't go into as much detail for the summary table. It's basically the same format, but in this instance, we're just storing the user ID for starters. And then we only have one key, one index on the table, which is the user ID. So we're not creating any global secondary indexes. We're just creating the follow-com index on the table, which is your partition key. Then this is more of our request validator. This is what we'll be validating our requests. So if you remember, we had models at the top that I mentioned we're using to validate the request. So there's a resource on API Gateway that is called a request validator that will help us validate those requests. And then finally, we have our Cognito definition. So we're defining Cognito here. And for Cognito, one thing you should be aware of is it has two things or two fundamental aspects to it. So there's a user pool. Now, a user pool is kind of like, see it as a database of all your users. That's where you would store your users, their username, their password. There are other details that you want to give them. This is where you would store it. And then there's a client, there's a user pool client. So for that user pool, you have to have something that is able to access that user pool, and it's called a client. So those two things are the fundamental building blocks of Cognito. Remember that Cognito is used basically for authentication and managing users on your system as it relates to what they have access to. So for it, we're creating a Cognito resource, a user pool, and then we're giving it a name. We're just calling it something budget app pool and then giving it the stage at the end. Then to define what you're going to be collecting, you put it under this schema. We're saying we're collecting emails, and you must always, like if you're signing up, you must always have an email. That's what we're saying. Minimum of email and password. So under here, that's where we're defining that we must have a password, and we're saying that the minimum length should be 6 and that we should auto-verify email addresses. So we don't want to send an email just for this lecture. We don't want to send an email and then have somebody click on it to verify. We want it to be auto-verified. And then this is our client. This is our user pool client. It's referencing the user pool here. And it is basically saying, how should we authenticate users? That's what we have under here. It's telling us that we should use, this just means use an email and password. That's what this means. But the AWS documentation explains it even further. This has to do with the validity of our tokens. So how long do we want the tokens to live? So when you authenticate with an API, I'm sure most of us are aware, but when you authenticate with an API, you would get a token back. You would then use that token to access other resources. So this is what we're saying here. How long should these tokens last? By default, if you don't set what type of unit the tokens should be, or this figure should be in, it is in hours. So I'm saying here that I want the tokens for my users to last for 5 hours, right? In a production system, you might not want to do this depending on the type of system you're building. But this is what it takes to create Cognito. I know I've gone through quite a lot here, but thank God it's a video. You can always go back and look at it, and you can look further into some of these resources, so that you can further understand them. And also, if you want to modify them, if you want to get more flexibility, then you can look at the AWS documentation for each of these. It's pretty much clear. So we'll just go ahead now and start creating some of the things that we've defined here. But first off, I noticed that I didn't have this resource playing well. So I will just fix that now. One moment. So now we're fine. So we're going to start creating some things. First of all, we're going to start with these models here so that we can, move forward. Now, how you decide to arrange your applications is totally up to you. But you can use this as a template if you want. Usually, we would keep all of the code inside an SRC folder. And then inside that SRC, I'm going to be creating another folder that I'll be calling validators. This is where we would have all of our validators. Some people call it models too. It's fine. Like I said, it is dependent on how you want to, create things. So we'll create a file. Here we're saying we're calling that file signup.json. And I'm going to be adding the signup.json file, or the content of the signup.json file right there. And this is it. Now, this is JSON schema. I don't know if any of us is conversant with JSON schema. Has anybody used JSON schema here? Yes, no? Okay. Are you guys tired already? Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Godwin is saying he has. And then, okay. Godwin is saying he's not tired. Okay. That is encouragement for me. All right. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate. So JSON schema is used, like you can define it a schema, like the name implies. There are different versions of it. Here we're using version 4. But you define a schema that you can now use for validation or it's not just used for validation, it can be used for a bunch of things, but it just enables you to define a schema that you're expecting. And here, what we're doing is we're defining for the sign-up, we're saying that we want email and we want it to follow this pattern. This is a regular expression that just says it has to be an email that has an @ sign and has a dot after the @ sign. That's what it's saying. And then we're saying that the format should be an email. To be honest, we might not necessarily need this pattern if we have this format, but I'll just keep it there just for explanation. Then we have password. We're saying it should be a string and the length should be 6. You can also use a regular expression to say that you want at least one number, at least a capital, a small letter, but I wanted to keep it simple. So this pattern here, this pattern here is used when you want to define the pattern of what you're expecting. And then we're saying that these 2 fields must be required. And we don't want any other. So additional properties, we're setting it to false to say that we don't want any other property on the JSON that we're expecting. We just want only these 2. Any other thing coming in means that request is bad. So we've saved this. Moving forward, we'll just go to our serverless.yml. Right now, we don't need this login guy just because if we leave it there, it's going to throw an error for us. So we'll just take it out. And then next up, we're going to create the function. Now, this is where I'm sure most of us your mouths have been watering. But we'll create the function now. So we're going to be adding in another folder into this SRC, and we're going to be calling it Lambda. You can call it whatever name is. Some people call it functions. I choose to call it Lambda sometimes, but it doesn't really matter. You just have to reference it properly here. So we're going to be adding, just like we did in the last section, we're going to be adding a signup.js file. Sorry, my system froze for a bit. Now, this is where we're now going to define our sign-up function. I'm going to have to copy and paste again because it's quite a long one. But I will go through it just like I told you guys. So this is it. Now, don't get overwhelmed, please. I'm going to explain it. What I will do, I will collapse a lot of these things so that we can look at it bit by bit. Now, we'll just make everything on the same screen. Now, for our sign-up function, we're going to be doing 2 things. If you remember the diagram, we had a client that would be calling our API gateway, and that would, be calling this function, this sign-up. But then this function has to interact with Cognito, if you remember. So we have to have some way or method in which this function will interact with Cognito. And we're going to be doing that using the AWS SDK. The AWS SDK is what gives you access to AWS resources from a Lambda function or from, anything. It doesn't have to be a Lambda function. Anywhere that you want to write code that will access an AWS resource, you would most likely be using the AWS SDK. You can make direct calls to API via their normal API, but that's a lot of work and a lot of stress. So the SDK enables you to call AWS services easily. So on the first line here, what we're doing is we're importing some stuff from the AWS SDK that will enable us to interact with Cognito. So the first thing we're importing, which is the most important guy, is the identity provider client. And then we're importing this admin create user command and the set password command, set user password command. Both of them are going to enable us to create a user on Cognito and to set their password respectively. Then on the second line, we're doing the same thing, but this time for DynamoDB. So we're creating, we're going to have to create a client that is going to enable us to interact with DynamoDB. And in this instance, we're going to be making a put. We're going to be putting an item into DynamoDB. Now, why, you may ask? When you create a user, you're creating them on Cognito, but you actually have to create their summary. So what's going to store their summary, which is, in this case, their total debits, their total credits. You have to create something that will store that on DynamoDB for that user so that you can reference the user. So that's what we're going to be doing with this put item command. We're putting things into the table. DynamoDB has different operations. The put item command is to put a single thing into the table. There's also a get item. There's also an update item. There's a delete item as well. So it's basically fraud, those four things. Then, because DynamoDB does not, when you're putting records into it, it has to be in a specific format. It looks like JSON, but it's not JSON. We're going to see it as well as part of our, workshop. I left some of the code in that format so that you can see it, what it looks like. So next up, what we're doing is we're basically initializing both the Cognito and the DynamoDB clients by using those things that we imported from the SDK. And then if you remember, we give some variables, some environment variables. So in this case, we're importing the user pool ID, which I mentioned, it is one of the building blocks for Cognito. And then here, we're also importing the name of the summary table because I just mentioned we're putting stuff into that table, which you're going to see. And then I collapsed these functions because I wanted us to first look at the handler. Now, if you remember from our last workshop, the handler is what is called by API gateway, or what API gateway sends an event to whenever we run, we call that API from a postman or from wherever. That's what it's called. So in this case, what we're saying is whenever the event comes in, we did this the last time, get the body of that event, JSON.parse convert it to JavaScript. Sorry, now you don't have to do this. I come from a strongly typed background, so I always put that at the end of my JavaScript code, but you don't have to. So now what we're saying is get the event body, store it in a variable we're calling sign up request, and then we're now saying that you should sign that person up, the person that signed up, and whatever response you get from signing that person up, return it back to the front end. Now, we're calling a function called sign up, and we have defined that function here. So we'll just go through the function. What are we doing? We're calling another function called create user item. It's always good to break things up so that it's more maintainable. I kept this code base a bit more simple, not because I didn't want us to go into things like Webpack, but there's a way we could have arranged this code such that we don't put everything inside this signup.js file, we could have used something called Webpack to, split things out into their own folder structures and then import them here. But I didn't do that because I didn't want to explain all of that and have it start looking a bit complex. But in a production environment, we will have to do that just so that our code is, first of all, bundled better, and also so that it's easier for somebody to even read. But for this case, we're going to put everything in a single file, and then hopefully we have other sections where we will break things out and do more best practices. But this is just for us to understand how to build. So like I said, we're calling another function called create user item. That function is below. It's here. What that function is doing is that, it's this one. What that function is doing is that it's taking what we've passed. So in this case, that sign up request that we passed earlier is taking it. Sorry, this is one of my pet peeves when I see things that don't have. So it's taking we're calling it user item here, but it's that sign up request that is taken. Is extracting the email and password. And then remember that we imported some helpers from the AWS SDK. Now this is where we use them. So what we're doing is that we're instantiating a command to create a new user, right? And we're using that helper function that we imported up here. And then after instantiating that, we're passing it the user pool ID, the email address. This message action suppress is basically telling Cognito, don't send an SMS or an email to the person. It's fine. If you wanted to do that, there are other values you could use here, but we're doing suppress because we don't want to do that. And then we're saying the attributes that should be stored in Cognito. So we're storing the email, and then we're saying that the email, we're storing another field that says that the email should always be verified. So we're setting it to true. And then we're sending that request here using our Cognito instance that we created previously. So when we send it, we're now checking if our response has a user object in it, then we now set the password for that user. And that's how Cognito works. You have to create the user first, then set their password. So that's what we're doing here. So we're setting the password. We're still referencing our user pool ID. It's very important. And then we're passing it the email, and we're saying that it should be a permanent password. So we don't want it to set a temporary password that the user will change later. We're saying we're setting this password and let it be the password now. Now, this is for this tutorial. In a production environment, you probably want to do for your users, you want to give them a temporary password. And then finally, we're also sending this command to set the password. If you notice here, some of you might ask, we're not handling errors and all of that. Like I said, this is more for us to understand, and then we can build on this. There are better ways to do this in the sense of, handling errors, breaking things up more into their own files. But I felt that doing that in a beginner kind of tutorial would have been an overkill, and it would have been an information overload. We're already learning a lot right now. Adding that would have, expanded what we needed to learn. So that's what we're doing here. We're creating that new user. If that is successful, then we go ahead and create a summary item. So what we're doing is we're creating an item in the summary table, like I mentioned, where we're storing the time that summary was created. We're storing the who owns that summary, and we're storing the total credits and debits, which we will update later. We're creating that summary item, which is very similar to creating the user item, but in this case, we're calling DynamoDB here. So we're passing the table name, we're passing the item. Now, remember I told you that DynamoDB there's a way you have to pass the records to DynamoDB. You can't just pass, a JavaScript object the way it is. If you pass it like that, it will fail. DynamoDB has a format. So what this Marshall is doing is that it is converting to DynamoDB's format and passing it to DynamoDB. And then we're sending a request to DynamoDB to create this summary item. And that's basically all we're doing for the sign up. So I'm going to save this, just look through it again to make sure everything is fine. And yes, somebody. Okay. So just to make sure everything is fine, and then we'll open our VS Code terminal, and we're going to deploy this now. So I'm going to look one more time so that we don't have issues. Okay, so there's something we've forgotten to do. And I don't know if anybody will get it. I'll be shocked if anybody can get it. So I'll give us a chance. We've forgotten to do something. Anyone? Anyone gets it, I'll be surprised. No, we've saved all our files. Yeah, we started serverless in the beginning, so something, if you're a JavaScript person, you will know what we forgot to do. The clue is here. And the clue is also here. Okay. No. So it's not the entry points. The clue is in the packages that we're importing and the plugins that we're importing. The clue is there. It's a very funny thing that we've forgotten. Very, very funny. Exactly. So Stanley got it. Stanley Daffy. So you've gotten it, Stanley. After I give you a clue, Sha. After I give you a clue. So Stanley, you're our second winner of a Serverless Guru voucher to, start your serverless journey. Or if you're already a serverless guru, then maybe you can dash it to somebody. But send me your email address as well on LinkedIn, and I will forward you the voucher at the end of today. Thank you very much. So we need to install those packages before we push it up. And in order to install them, Stanley, can you also let us know what is the file that we are missing? No, it's not env. There's a file we're missing. That is the file every JavaScript person knows. Very popular file.
Index.
No, it's not even index. One very popular file that you use it to install when you install a package, it appears. It's package.json.
Oh, I've used JavaScript in a while. But don't escape my memory. Look at this.
So I'm just popping in what we already have in our own case. It's NUG, what do we call it again? Budgeting up. I didn't realize how low my laptop was. No worries. Majid said he got it. Majid is looking for another win. Don't worry, Majid, you win. Majid, don't worry, you win.
Don't worry, Majid. Another one will come up.
Another one will come. Exactly. Yeah, so we'll just install. So basically, these are the packages we need. We've already seen these three. We don't need some of them like this two, or even the three of them, actually. We don't. But for the rest of them, we actually need them. So I'll just go ahead and install. And then we will now deploy and see if we can create a new user or if we'll get the 500 error. As it did. So let's just give it a second. What's going on? It's usually faster than this. So. Okay. Flipping through the screens is very funny. VS Code should stop yelling at me. Okay, so we're going to now deploy. And if you remember how we do, I created a profile like this. That's why I'm using this.
Nice.
Hmm?
Oh, error. Like
Ogini. Okay, so let's see what the problem is. So it's telling me that
value not far for self.
Yeah, for resource.
Variable resource.
Okay, let me see. Okay, I think it has to do with the one. IMO statements one. So it's not finding this guy. Summary table. Okay, I see the problem. Indentation. So you see sometimes we can miss out on things like this. So let me even look at the entire file to be sure we don't have any of these indentation problems. It looks good. So that's the thing with YAML. Same way that if you miss a semicolon in some languages, or if you miss a closing brace, you have issues. Which one now? Did I save it? I did. So what's the problem? One of the disadvantages of copy and paste. Let me just close this. Right. This is supposed to be inside here. Okay, I have an issue with, sorry, I have to stop this. The way I define the framework. I remember I just typed that thing out myself. What am I doing wrong? Let's see. Yep. I see the problem now. So these things are actually usually good because it kind of makes you know where you went wrong. So yeah, now it's packaging and it's deploying. So while it's deploying, I'm anticipating that this one might take, and then stack does not exist. is not supposed to exist. It's actually not supposed to exist. So why is it doing this? One moment, let me check the console. You must work today, whether you like it or not. I'm just checking cloud formation to see if there's an issue. Okay, I see what's going on. I had started deploying and then I stopped it. So we need to give it some time to basically delete that thing that I started. Okay, Akim, no problem. One moment, guys. Let me also switch on my AC. My laptop has started letting me know. One moment. Okay. So we're still uploading. Let's give it some time. I think I should just share my entire screen because we're going to be using a Postman now. Okay, so while we're waiting for this to deploy.
So Tobenna, if you wanna feel like this is probably taking too long, you wanna push to part 2, we can also do that as well.
If I want to do
I said if you're feeling tired a little, I know you might still want to do something. We can postpone it for part 2, but
okay.
it's up to you though.
Okay,
And
so I wanted
everyone.
I wanted to do this endpoint and do the login.
Okay.
And then we'll call it a day.
Okay. All right.
Next one will now be us building the other endpoints, but at least we finish authentication today.
Okay. Very good.
Is that okay by everyone? Having another error.
Oh, it's a permission issue?
No, it's not permissions.
Oh,
So because it failed, there are some things that have not, deleted well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the problem. So, okay, everybody's saying it's okay. So let's see. Okay, let's give it some time. Okay, but while we're waiting, does anybody have any question right now? while we're waiting for this to resolve, does anybody have a question? Or everybody understands? Everybody's tired. Which one? You mean like on AWS? Or you mean like what we're learning now? Is there any way you can access it after now? Godwin. The code, yeah, definitely. So immediately after this, this class, we're going to definitely provide the code base, just like we did for the last one. So I'm going to share the code base. So what I will do is that code base I shared initially, I'll share it again, but this time around, I'll be breaking it into, what do you call it? Branches. So you can see where we're at every point in time. And then eventually when we're done, the main branch will have what is up to date. Or in fact, the main branch will have what is up to date. Then the other ones will be, branches of where we're at every point in time. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So setting up an AWS account, what I've learned is if you've heard of Eversend, they're good. They're like a card, these guys that give you virtual cards. So I was able to use that for both my AWS and Google accounts. So you can try them. Just create a card, put maybe like $5 in it or $10, and then create an AWS account. It works for me. So that, I hope that answers the question. This is taking unusually long to, okay, it's complete. So let's try and delete it again. And then I'll go and check the table and delete the table. Happen, but it was actually my mistake. It's it failed. Why? So this is actually, oh, let's see. So let's do this. So some of the things that are created, they don't get deleted properly, especially if there's a way like I was deploying and I cut it off. So when that happens, sometimes you would need to manually go and delete certain things like S3, like DynamoDB. You might have to do that because it's just to protect you anyways, so that you don't delete something critical from your infrastructure. So I'm just going to go and delete that bucket that contains the code that we're deploying. I just want to be sure. So it's this one. I'm going to empty it. Moving these things around. Imagine it says fund the major issue. I agree with you. I agree with you. It's not very friendly now, but we move, Abby. Really. You guys want me to enter this long name? Okay. Sorry, guys. Let me cause this one, but let me get that sorted. and then we'll deploy again. Okay, so I think we should be good now. Let me just check that the bucket is not the bucket, but the DynamoDB table is also not there. Oh, I think I know what the problem actually is. It wasn't that the table. Yeah, so when you're creating stuff on your accounts, you have to give them a unique name. So I had given a name when I was preparing for this. I had given this same name, so that's why now it's having issues. So what I would do, I would just add my name, Tobe, to it. So I think that's actually what the problem was. I'm trying to navigate all of this. Okay. So hopefully it works. Oh yeah, so Johnson, I'll reply you by direct message. Well, I mean, everybody can see my screen, so it doesn't matter. But what is their name again? Eversend. So it's Eversend. You can also try cheaper. I know cheaper works. That is cheaper cash. It works for AWS, but I know it doesn't work for some places. So I don't know if AWS has stopped their card from working as well. But these guys that I just sent, Eversend, they work for everywhere that I've used them for. In fact, that's my primary card now. The other option is also if you can get a domiciliary account, that works too. But with DOM accounts, the only downside I would say to DOM accounts is that with DOM accounts, if you're running away from spending, you're going to spend. Why? Because DOM accounts, they require a minimum amount and it's usually $50, which right now is 50-something thousand. So sometimes it just doesn't make sense to spend that amount to create an AWS account. So I would say go with the Eversend, those kind of options, because you're spending less, one, and then it's not like you're spending the money on AWS anyways. You can still use that money. AWS just wants to verify your card. So it doesn't mean they will take the money. So that's it. Okay, while we wait for this, let me do this. Let me just set the color that we'll be using up. So I'll just create a new collection. I'll call it NUG budgeting app. Sorry, I have a lot of stuff going on. It was the life I chose. So we'll call this sign up. Remember, as a post request, we're supposed to have a body that says email and password. I'll just put rubbish here so that we can test that it works. Hopefully it has deployed. Oh, thank you, Lord. It has deployed finally. Can I get a hallelujah? I mean it though. Okay, so let's test now. Yeah, I know. Let's test. So if we call this API now, we should get a 400 because as we can see, the email is not an email. So it should fail because we have a validator. So let's see. Yep, so we have a 400 with a bad request body. Let's give it, a good email. Let's just see Tobenna at serverless.ng. If I just put, remember we said 6 characters. If I just put 4, it won't work. I still get the invalid request body. But if I say 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, this should work. And we should create, yeah, so it tells us 201 created, and this was successfully registered. This was successfully registered, and then we can also confirm that on Cognito. So this is, first of all, since we're already in DynamoDB, let's see if that table was created, right? So go to tables. We should be looking for the table that has to be. So it's this one, transactions, budget to be, summary budgets to be. So those 2 tables were created, right? The one we're supposed to check if something was created in is this summary budget to be. I don't know why this thing just, okay. So if we click on this one and we go to explore table items, we should see a record created there. Fantastic. So we have this record created. This is the email address I entered. We can see the time it was created. And then the total credit and debit for now is 00. So this is fine. We should also have a user on Cognito. Now, Cognito is where our username and password is stored, if we remember. So we should be looking for a user pool that has Tobenna at serverless.ng inside. Yeah, so we have 2 of this. Should have given it another name, but anyways, this was the one that was created 5 minutes ago. If we click on it, then we can see that it's been created. It's also confirmed. So it's part of those things that we entered. We didn't have to, click on a button somewhere to confirm the mail because we created it that way. So now we know that this works. So we'll just do the login quickly. And then once we're done with that, we will we'll call it a day and then do the next, for the next class, or for the next workshop, we will now work on the actual endpoints for the budgeting service. So yeah, we always start in the serverless.yml file. I should move this down so that you guys can see. So we always start here. We would first need to add our model. So I'm just going to do that one quickly here. Just do a copy and paste. I hope it doesn't bite me. We'll call this one login requests. We're going to have a login.json. And funny enough, the login and the sign up, they're actually the same validator because it's also expecting an email and password. So we'll just copy this. Now, I could have used the same one, but usually it's not good to do that, because tomorrow, if we said we wanted to add some more things that the person should pass during sign up, then we would have an issue. So here we'll just create a new one. We'll call it login.json. It's basically the same thing, but we'll just title it login. So we're done with our model here. Then we'll also create the handler for the login, or like the definition, the function definition. I'm also going to do a copy and paste because, excuse me, because they are almost also the same thing. The only thing is that this one does not necessarily call, it's not saving anything in DynamoDB. It is just sorry. This one is just calling Cognito to get credentials. So we'll just change things. And we'll see, rather than create a new user, login user. Now I don't have to do all this, but I just don't want us to create something that is looking funny. Here, we don't need these two permissions, so I can take them out. All we need to do is to initiate the authentication here. We don't need to create a new user or add a new password. Then here, I don't think we're writing to any table or we need any table, so we're just going to remove this. So yeah, that's our function definition. And then we would now create the function. Sorry, I'm moving pretty quick now, just because of the time. I appreciate every one of you, for staying on here. So I'll just copy what I've worked on before. Where is this guy? So this is login. Guys, I know I'm working on too many things at the same time. I know. You're not the first person to tell me. So yeah. So we're creating, so what we're doing here is just like we did for the sign up. We're initiating a client for Cognito, we're pointing to the user pool ID, and for the login, you have to point to the client. So remember, I mentioned that there's a user pool and there's a user pool client. The user pool is where the information is housed as regards your username and password and any other metadata you want to give Cognito. But the client is how you actually log in. If you want to log in or if you want to do anything to the records that you've created, you have to use the client. So here, what we're doing is, we're getting the email and password from the request, just like sorry. Let me not get ahead of myself. I know I'm rushing. So we'll first look at the handler as usual. So it's the handler that is your entry point. Just like we did for the sign up, the handler here is getting the request from API gateway and is forwarding it to another function called login, and then returning the response of that function. Now, the function itself is extracting the email and password, then it is creating a command to initiate the authentication. So it's passing that username and password to Cognito and telling Cognito, okay, check if it's good, check if this person is authenticated. And then Cognito is supposed to return us a token, right? So what we're now doing on that is, remember, we usually initiate the command and then we send it using the Cognito client that we defined up here. So for this, I wrapped it in a try-catch block just because whenever an error is thrown, and this is something you should know when you're working with serverless, especially if you're using serverless framework. Whenever an error is thrown, the function halts. Now, in this case, when we call this, if the username and password is wrong, rather than just returning a response to this response object or this response variable, rather than it getting a response, an actual error is thrown by the Conginot client. So in that case, we would get a 500 if we don't handle that error. So what I did here is, if there's no error, so we're trying first. If there's no error, then we're checking that the authentication results. So we're supposed to get a response that is in this particular format, but we're just checking that it has an object called authentication result and an inner object called, on the second level, called ID token, which is what we'll be using. Now, if that is successful, we're returning the 200, and then we're returning that the user was logged in successfully, as well as that token that was returned, so that the user can use it for further endpoints. If it's not, right, if it's not part of this, if we're returning a 401 with unauthorized access, because sometimes it could log the person in, but the person's access is disabled. So it would return a response in that instance. Now, in the instance where it is not, the login details are incorrect, so returned as unauthorized access. That's what I'm doing. We can drill down to the actual error if we wanted to. We can catch the actual error and return the appropriate response for any kind of error that is returned. But in this instance, I'm handling all of them as basically this person cannot log in. So that's what we're doing here. And that's all we're doing for the login. So just like the sign up, we're going to deploy the login and then we're going to test it. So that being said, I will go ahead and do a deploy. I hope I've saved everything. And let me just have one look again at this to make sure everything is fine. I think so. I think we're good. So let's go ahead and deploy. Last, if you fail, we'll fix them. So it's deploying now. While we wait, I'm thinking of the last trivia that we're going to ask today, because we have one more prize. What is the last trivia today? Akim, do you want to help me?
All right, so what should we do for the last trivia?
The last trivia is there's a course in the last one, in the last class that but that one is on Udemy. It's a very good course, actually.
Okay.
So I would also, whoever wins that will go home with that.
All right, so let's look for the fasting guy, right?
Sorry?
Or do you want to post the question, or you want me to post the question?
You go ahead. I'm giving you this thing. Let it be hard, Sha.
Let's be hard. Okay. Let me think. Oh. Hold on.
Majid, why you laugh?
Let me find something.
Majid will say we're bad belly now that he wants to win. Finally, he wants to stop his progress. Abi Majid. I'm also thinking myself, I'm thinking of something that I said that you guys might have missed.
I was thinking about something.
I have one. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I know I mentioned facts. Let me go to package.json now so that you guys will not. Let me go to this so that you guys will not cheat. So I mentioned that there are two things that are required, that are the building blocks for Cognito. If you can get two of them, first person. I need two of them. So you've given somebody the chance now. Boom, Onyedika got two of them. So Onyedika, do you have a Udemy account? Do you have a Udemy account? Okay, so send me the email address for your Udemy account so I can gift it to you. Johnson, don't worry. I answered it already. The only person I'm feeling bad for is Majid. Because Majid tried, but when it's not just your time.
So Majid didn't win anything. Don't worry. We'll hook you up.
Yeah, we should hook Majid up.
Send me your email, Majid. Send me your email.
Majid.
I might get you AWS credit.
Majid has won something. I wanted to say that it is not your local. It's not. It's
your local.
So yeah. Don't mind me.
That's funny.
Okay, so let's just test the login and then can call it a night because it's not a day anymore in Nigeria. So I'll just duplicate this guy because I'm lazy. I'm not lazy, I'm joking. And they have basically the same request body. But I'll just fill first so that we'll see what happens. So I'll do Tobenna 1, 2. And then I'll call it. So it's telling me unauthorized access because I don't have the right credentials. So if I do the right one now, it should work. Yep. So I was logged in successfully. Who is clapping now? You guys don't know how to clap. I'm joking, sorry. So yeah, so we are getting sorry, I need to move this thing around a lot. We're getting this token, and this is what we'll use come next class, next session we have to call the other APIs. So right now, today, we didn't do as much as I thought we would do, but at least we're able to build the authentication. So we have our authentication sorted now. So next up, we're now going to be calling endpoints on the app. Thank you so much for your time today. For those of you that I'm owing, please just send me your details. Send it to me on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, then I'll just drop my mail so that you can send it to me because I might forget. So the next one, I'm not sure. I want to do next week, right? So that we can just get, I want us to finish this thing this year if possible, if it's possible, but next week, I think I have an end of the year party. So even if we're doing next week, then it will have to be in either noon, not at 4, because the party starts at 5. So we might just do earlier next week. So I think we can do next week. So
or you want to move it we can move it to January. We don't have to do it next week because I know people have different things, planned holidays. What do you think?
Okay, so January is fine. So we'll just continue.
Right,
so that everybody can go and rest.
Yeah. So, and then you will have time too. So you're not rushing.
No problem. No problem. All right, guys, I'll drop the code for this, and then thank you so much for your time. Sorry for the small errors that we had, but it's part of, you will experience that in your day-to-day anyways. But thank you so much for your
that's normal. Yeah, I hope everybody learned a lot. So, and this is going to be recorded, so we put it on our website. I mean, on the YouTube. So, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Tobenna, for your time. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.